Hi gang, this is the status update of our work all this year, 2013, on faculty development for Creating the Future. But really what it has become is the announcement of a new program at Creating the Future, which is a program for teaching people how to teach in a way that brings out the best in ourselves and in others. Way back when we started this, back in March of this year, we were coming right out of our asset-based resource development work. And out of that work, we knew that one of the assets we really wanted to nurture was the asset of our fellows, our graduates, who were really wanted to teach on behalf of Creating the Future, and we really wanted them to do so. So the question became, how do we know if people are ready? How do we get them ready? How do we screen them to know if they're qualified to teach on behalf of Creating the Future? And that was really what we started with in March. But because of the way that we do things around here, because we don't just attack the presenting issue as an issue, because what we look at is how does that reach for what's possible, and understanding that any issue is just a precondition to that high potential, what we found was gold. And what we found was something way more powerful than just screening people to be able to teach. So let me share with you the path that we have taken, because many of you have been on it, and until really looking at it as a whole, even I didn't realize that we've really taken a huge leap forward. So let me share with you a little bit about what that is, show you where we've come in all of our meetings, and show you where we're headed, because it's pretty exciting. When we started during our first meeting, the question we really were looking to answer was, what training do people need if they're going to teach on behalf of Creating the Future? And even more than that, how do we screen them? How do we know? What are the qualities we're looking for? What are the qualifications somebody needs to have? During that first meeting, we talked a lot about movements. We asked what types of education amplifies a movement for change. And we talked about what a movement actually is. We asked a lot about what defines movement, what causes people to see things differently. From there, we made it personal. We asked what caused each of you to want to participate in Creating the Future's programs. What led to you saying, wow, this is something I really want to do? The answers to that were powerful. The thought that my community deserves the best and I want to be that for them. The thought that if I'm to reconnect to my community, I must first reconnect to myself. The thought that care and love bring about change. The spiritual component of movements, linking ourselves to society. All of those responses came together to create sort of a list of what all of our instructors must do and have. They must be able to tell stories, stories that connect the individual self, the small self, to the big self. Our instructors have to be able to demonstrate what community looks like, what it feels like, what care and love for ourselves and others look like and feel like. And obviously, we need to accomplish some predetermined educational outcomes for each of the classes that we would teach. So what qualities and proficiencies would somebody need to have to meet all of those criteria? That's where we started in meeting number 2. We talked about what it would take to be able to tell relevant stories. And one of those was that people would need to have the experience to have the stories in the first place, the ability to frame the story to make it relevant. People need to pull out of their own stories the ones that are relevant, understanding their audience, meeting people where they are. Defining relevant stories as stories that resonate, that ring true, that make people feel like, hey, you're telling my story. When it came to having the language to connect the small self to the big self, we talked about language that moves from me to we, language that acknowledges where people are and meets them there, the ability to hear the language of the group and to reflect that back. People needed to be able to use their own language and to adapt their own language, choosing language, connecting language. How to embed sensitivity into language, into a recorded class that's only 20 minutes long. When it came to demonstrating what community looks like and feels like, we talked about understanding how to paint a picture together. Asking questions like, what does the community feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? What do you hear? What do you see? We also realized that people needed to have actual experience in building community before they could teach that. We did the same as we looked at all of the other items on the list here. What does it look and feel like when someone is demonstrating care and love? What qualities and proficiencies does it take to connect the being to the doing? By the time of our fourth meeting, we had discussed all of the qualities and proficiencies people would need to have in order to teach on behalf of creating the future. Now came the big question. Okay, what do we do with all of that? We started out the meeting asking, what should an application process make possible? How will we know if it's the person that we want? What is the plan? What is the format for making that selection? And we hashed that out for quite a long time until finally Bill Music said, you know, the process that we're talking about here goes directly counter to our values. We're talking about an exclusionary process rather than an inclusive process. And that led to the most powerful question I think we've asked in all of these months. How do we, instead of screening people out, prepare them to be in? Instead of looking at excluding people, how do we invite them? Instead of seeing people as risks that need to be screened and managed, how do we invite them and nurture their gifts and celebrate their gifts and honor their gifts? That became the most powerful question, and it just changed absolutely everything. In meeting number 5, everything became practical. And what we started to do was to put Bill's wisdom of preparing people into action. So the first thing we did was we deconstructed a flash class so that everybody could understand what it took and what went into actually creating the flash classes. We started with the very, very beginning when we get an idea for a class. How do we use the reverse engineering framework and the continuum to turn that idea into a topic? Once we have a topic, we're going to use that both to promote and invite people through a blog post and through social media, but also it's going to actually become the class. So there's going to be writing the class and the slides, but there's also going to be incorporating the frameworks into that topic. How do we teach the topic? How do we use the continuum to teach the topic? So we're actually then going to present the class, which includes having thought starter questions that we ask before the class, sometimes in a blog post, sometimes in a message. And then after the class, we're going to follow up both with handouts and with a Q&A on Facebook. So what does Creating the Future actually have to do to prepare people to teach? Here's where hindsight came in. Here's where being able to look back over the video of the meeting really, really helped. Because those of you who are in that meeting may remember it was sort of dense. It was sort of brain twisting. We talked about a lot of different things. And I remember at one point Gail said, I'm really glad I'm not having to figure out the notes on this. Here's what, in looking back at that meeting, is becoming very clear. What we were talking about was a two-pronged approach. We were talking about an approach for people who have taken the immersion course, but also another approach for people who have not taken the immersion course. We realized that for people who had not taken the immersion course, they were going to need to understand a lot about what Creating the Future is all about in the first place. It led to our talking about creating almost a whole program, which is where this is going, a program for teaching others how to teach. And what became very clear is that it didn't matter if they were just teaching for us or if they took what they learned and took it elsewhere. That what they were going to have to learn was first what Creating the Future is all about. Second, how to use the frameworks to create the classes. And then third, how to use the continuum of potential. That we could do this in a series of videos. We could do this in a series of webinars and flash classes themselves. Jane had talked about the need to invest in one's own education if one wanted to teach. And the very, very clear thing that came out was that people would have a community of peer mentors, that we would all be mentoring each other in learning how to teach. Whether somebody had taken the immersion class or not, they were going to need to understand what Creating the Future is all about. They were going to need to understand our theory of change and how that applied to the education programs that further our mission. They were going to need to understand not only the Pollyanna principles, but what our values look like in action. What do those principles look like in action when we're actually teaching a class? They were going to need to understand the importance of understanding and modeling the frameworks to accomplish the mission. And that was really whether they had taken the immersion class or not. Somebody would also need to understand how to use the frameworks, both for creating the idea in the first place, turning that idea into a topic, turning that topic into content. Somebody was also going to need to understand how to use the continuum of potential, both for the content development, for the pre-class thought starters, and for promoting and inviting people. What's become clear is that that is a program in and of itself. What we'll be teaching people is how to bring out the best in themselves and in others. And interestingly, the one thing that we've all been sort of curious about, how do you teach And how do you embody the spirit of care for self and others? Well, you teach it by having a program that is about bringing out the best in ourselves and in others through our teaching. By having that program, people who already know what Creating the Future is about will know what Creating the Future is about. They don't have to watch a video, but we'll have the video for people who don't. From there, everybody will have to learn how the frameworks apply to building content for a class. And what that'll do is it'll teach them how to bring out the best in themselves and in others, no matter what they're teaching and for whom. It doesn't have to be for Creating the Future. Once they've learned the frameworks, once they've learned about the continuum, which could be by taking a webinar, it could be by taking a flash class, and once they have had a community of mentors all around them, then the real bonus for them is that they can teach on behalf of Creating the Future, which provides a revenue stream for them and for us, which brings us right back down to that whole concept of asset-based resource development, which is that we're nurturing the assets that are ours and yours. That if people are an asset, what does it mean to actually nurture that asset so that that asset grows, so that people grow? And what became very, very clear in producing this video is that that's exactly what we've been talking about. And I'm so grateful for Bill for changing our framing as we started to say, wait a minute, this isn't about screening, this is about preparing people. And if we're preparing people, we can prepare anybody, anywhere, and that's what our education mission is all about. So that's how we've gone from trying to figure out how to screen people out to how to create a program that brings people in. So here's what's next. What's next is that those of you who want to teach and are ready, feel that you'd like to be ready to teach by December 31st, will form our first cohort. And what we'll be focusing on is teaching of small, discrete pieces. Flash classes, a blog post, some of the 3-minute videos that we put into our newsletter. That cohort will meet together, we'll listen to a flash class, we'll deconstruct how the class models the qualities and proficiencies that we're looking for. That cohort will work together to use the frameworks and the continuum of potential to actually develop a flash class. And by December 31st, hopefully you guys will be ready to actually record that class and make it possible. From there, we've got lots of work to do to figure out how we're going to work with folks who have not been through the immersion course, how we're going to make sure that content fits what makes sense for Creating the Future. And then finally, we will be developing a full-fledged education program with all of the pieces that I've been talking about here, with videos and webinars and flash classes that teach anybody who wants to learn how to teach in a way that brings out the best in themselves and in others. So that's it. That is hopefully has brought you up to speed from way back in March to where we are now. And it'll be really exciting to have you guys ready to teach and to be our first cohort to teach on behalf of Creating the Future. We'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.